All right, lift off and the clock has started.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
And liftoff, the final liftoff of Atlantis on the shoulders of the space shuttle. America will continue the dream.
This is The Space Shot, episode 385, OSIRIS-REx and Bennu. My conversation with Dan Scheeres. I'm John Molnix.
My name is Dan Scheeres. I'm a distinguished professor at the University of Colorado, and I have my position is in the SMED Aerospace Engineering Sciences Department in the College of Engineering and Applied Science.
Welcome back, everyone. It's been a few weeks. Today, you'll hear my conversation with Dr. Daniel Scheeres, or Dan as he likes to be called. He's a University of Colorado distinguished professor and the radio science lead and co-investigator on NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission to the asteroid Bennu. Before we dive into that chat, I've got a quick update. The interview I had scheduled with the Zero to Infinity CEO has slipped, and at this point I don't have an update on when the next interview will take place. I'll be sure to keep everybody updated when I have a new date. Also, the commercial space update episode is coming soon. I've been a little bit preoccupied in my personal life over the past couple weeks, so I do apologize for that delay. Now, let's head to Bennu, or more accurately Boulder, Colorado, for my chat with Dan so we can learn more about this incredible mission. So Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast. We're going to be talking about Bennu and the OSIRIS-REx mission, which is something that CU Boulder is involved with. Right. Can you tell us a little bit about why Bennu and why the OSIRIS-REx mission?
Yeah, it's super exciting, so I love talking about it. The OSIRIS-REx mission, and I'll talk about that first, is it's actually the principal investigator is at the University of Arizona. It's Dante Loretta. It's sort of run out of there, but University of Colorado, we have some key roles to play in that mission. And I've been involved with OSIRIS-REx for over a decade already. The mission itself is to go out, visit an asteroid, get a sample of that asteroid, and bring it back to Earth so that they can bring it in and do very detailed analysis and really break down what are the fundamental components of that material that we grab from this asteroid. I should mention that the spacecraft was actually built in the Denver area by Lockheed Martin, and they are the prime spacecraft and sort of the operations center for everything that goes on. So actually, even though the science center is down in Tucson, Arizona, a lot of the operations and a lot of the activity is right up here in the Denver area. So it's only like a 45-minute drive for us to get down to the operations center, which is cool, and we like to do that once in a while.
For sure.
Yeah. So the OSIRIS-REx is a NASA mission, and it was chosen as part of the New Frontiers program, and these are sort of billion-dollar class missions. So it's a big mission. It's not as big as like a Cassini mission or James Webb Space Telescope, but it's bigger than other missions that are out there. And to go to an asteroid, collect a sample, and bring it back, that's a lot of work. There's a lot of activity. So we want to go to an interesting asteroid. There's a lot of asteroids out there, and I think they're all interesting, but some are more interesting than others. The asteroid that we're going to right now, it's classified as a B-type asteroid or a carbonaceous asteroid. What that really means is that it's a very primitive body. It's a very primitive asteroid. We think the material that it's made out of has been relatively unchanged since the dawn of the solar system.
So a couple billion years.
Yeah, potentially.
More or less.
Right. It's probably been through a couple of cycles of, forming a larger body than getting broken up. But we believe it's never been heated up enough to actually drive the water out of the minerals, and to sort of change its state, so to speak. So that's why we go to Bennu, because Bennu turns out to be one of these very primitive asteroids. It's also turns out to be an asteroid that's relatively easy to get to in terms of a spacecraft. Okay. Because the big problem with space is, you have to bring your own propellant with you. And especially for a sample return, you not only have to go to the asteroid, and then you have to stop at the asteroid, and then you hang out at the asteroid, then you have to come all the way back to Earth again. So that takes a lot of propellant. Bennu turns out to be one of the cheapest, quote-unquote, asteroids to get to that has this interesting composition. So that's really why we go to Bennu.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that that NASA's interested in it, is because it's one of those asteroids that could potentially pose a threat to Earth.
That's another aspect of Bennu. Just because it's easy to get to doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to hit the Earth at any time in the future. However, it turns out that Bennu is one of the most hazardous asteroids that we know. But let me qualify that. Okay. What do I mean by that? That means that at some point in the future, and I think this point in the future is like 100 years or so, there's a possibility that Bennu might hit the Earth. Now, the probability is actually quite small.
Sure.
But it's something that we need to keep our eye on. Sure. It's far enough in the future so that we don't need to worry about it right now. But one of the things that we'll do by going to Bennu, visiting it, being in orbit around it, is we'll be able to nail down its location, its orbit, so to speak, very precisely. We'll also be able to determine very precisely all the very small, what we call non-gravitational forces that act on it. Things like sunlight shining on the body.
It's like off-gassing.
Yeah, and off-gassing and all that can push this, push the body just a very, very small amount. But it could push Bennu so that it misses the Earth, or it could push Bennu so that it hits the Earth. and this is something that we want to understand.
Sure.
And one of the things we get out of this mission is also a better understanding of, is there a real risk for Bennu hitting us in the future or not? That's not why we're going to Bennu, but it's this big benefit that we get from getting the sample and analyzing this very primitive body. Is we also get to do a little, a planetary defense is the technical term for it.
Sure. It's crazy how many things that went today. The day that we're doing the interview is the anniversary of the meteor that exploded over Russia.
Right, the Chelyabinsk, yes.
Yeah, and it's kind of this perfect time to have this conversation, I guess, for that one.
Yes.
So one of the things that your team here at CU is looking at specifically then is the radio science for the mission. How does that play into determining the composition of the asteroid?
Yeah, so radio science is sort of this weird term. It actually applies to many, many different types of scientific investigations. For this mission, what that really means is well, if you think about it, every time the Earth communicates with the spacecraft and the spacecraft communicates with the Earth, we send radio waves back and forth.
Sure.
And it turns out because there's a speed, or we're traveling relative to each other, there's this thing called the Doppler shift. Mm-hmm. Which actually changes the frequency that the Earth beams up to the spacecraft gets it, beams it back down, and we can actually measure the relative speed between the Earth, or a tracking dish, and the asteroid. So that's the radio part.
Okay.
And what we do is we actually can use that measurement of the speed and the change in the measurement of the speed in order to actually measure the accelerations that are acting on the spacecraft.
Okay.
We have to do a lot of other modeling. There's a lot that goes into it, but this is the fundamental measurement that we make. If you can measure the acceleration that the spacecraft is feeling, when we're next to the asteroid, we get to measure, how the asteroid is attracting our spacecraft. And so really we're measuring the gravitational attraction of Bennu. Another way of thinking of it is we're weighing Bennu, okay? And then by orbiting around it for a while, we can actually do more than just get the total mass. We can actually start to get insight into how lumpy that mass is distributed inside of the body.
So if there's like caves or if there's
voids,
more.
Voids or concentrations of matter, or if everything is just uniformly distributed inside of it, by using this tracking data from the Deep Space Network, and using this measurement of the Doppler shift, same thing that the cops use, on your car as you speed by, essentially.
Not me. I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yes. So we're measuring the mass distribution of this asteroid.
So when we're in orbit around Bennu now, one of the things that I found interesting about this when I was reading about the mission is how slow the spacecraft is moving relative to Bennu. Can you talk a little bit about how that would play into the radio science investigations?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, that's just this very fascinating aspect of the mission. So right now we're in a... I can pull out my calculator and I'll do this little calculation.
Perfect.
I want to get it right. So we've now measured the mass of Bennu.
Okay.
I can tell you the mass, but that's not what we do. What we actually deal with is this thing called the gravitational parameter.
Okay.
And for Bennu, it's about 5 meters cubed per second squared. Divide that by 1,000 meters, because that's how close we are to the body.
Okay.
Right now. Square root, and we are traveling at about 7 centimeters per second right now in orbit around the body.
That's really slow.
That is, yeah. If you think about it, you would have a hard time walking that slowly. That's like super slow motion. Just measure out 7 centimeters. What would that be? It'd be like half a foot, less than half
Give or
a foot.
take.
Like 4 inches or something like that. Try to walk at 4 inches per second, 5 inches per second. In fact, this would be a great activity
for little kids, for students.
Yeah. That's how slow we're orbiting around this body.
Wow.
But the body is so small that even though we're going that slow, we can still go all the way around the body in like a day or so.
Wow.
So we're orbiting around this body. The body itself is only like 500 meters across. So here in the Front Range, if you threw Bennu back up in the mountains, it would just be this little hill. Yeah, this little bump. Or like like an anthill. You just climb up to the top of it and say, oh, okay, there's bigger mountains over there. However, but even something that's small, you can go into orbit around it. You can be captured into orbit, and you can actually measure the gravitational attraction that this guy has on you. But yeah, everything is just scaled down. If you stood on the surface, the gravity field on the surface is about what we would call 1 micro G, which means it's 1/millionth of the Earth.
Oh my gosh.
So
okay.
Yeah, however much you weigh, you would weigh 1/millionth that much on Bennu. It's a different state of matter.
Yeah.
Really. When I was a kid, I remember the big thing about the moon is you go to the moon and like a tenth of your weight. It's like, oh wow, that's so awesome. Well, this is 1/millionth. We got the moon beat, right?
Alan Shepard really could have had a big drive off of Bennu.
Oh yeah. You sneeze. I mean, literally, you sneeze, or if you travel at like 10 centimeters, 15 centimeters per second, you escape. and you go off and you never come back.
Oh my gosh.
So, and that's like dropping something from a millimeter, less than an inch, the speed that you build up on Earth. So it's a completely different world in terms of orbiting, in terms of touching the surface. And that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
Because it's a sample collection.
What kind of force would the spacecraft experience then when it touches the surface?
Yeah, so the attraction is so weak that we don't just let ourselves fall, because that would take a very long time. We sort of, speed up a little bit and run at the asteroid.
Okay.
And right now the contact is designed so that we're traveling at about 10 centimeters per second when we hit the surface, which is, again,
still slow.
Extremely slow, but that's faster than sort of the orbital mechanics speed there. But when we hit the asteroid, it's as if you walk into a brick wall at that speed. That's the force that we feel, so to speak. The mass of the spacecraft behind you, or just yourself. If you walk slowly into a brick wall, you still walk into a brick wall, right? Yeah. You still could bump your nose. The thing is, we don't think it's brick. We think it's some weird, maybe like a sandy surface. There are boulders on the surface. There are rocks on the surface. We don't know how strong they are.
Okay.
So it's more like going up into the open space and walking into a cliff face at 10 centimeters per second.
Before you can do that, though, there's a lot of reconnaissance that has to be done on the surface. How does the radio science then play into that? You talked a little bit about the distribution of how the asteroid is composed on the inside. Mm-hmm. Does that give insight to the team then on where they should be looking for a potential sample spot?
Yeah, so our data doesn't drive them that much, although they need to understand how that mass is distributed, because when we do come really close to the surface, that could pull us one way or the other. So we always like to, especially NASA likes to plan everything out to the nth degree.
Yeah.
And they get worried if your predicted trajectory is going to deviate because of those mass concentrations. So our result feeds into that. But we have a lot of other instruments on the spacecraft, and they're looking at really looking at different wavelengths of light, from thermal emissions down to visible, what we see, and in between, near infrared and all that. And by looking at the reflectance of the body at all these different wavelengths, we can actually get clues as to what it's really made out of. We obviously had a pretty good idea of what it was made out of before we went and flew there.
Sure.
Okay. But now that we're very close to it, we can get these really high resolution images of it. We can see how the material is distributed over the surface, what the color of the material is. That's really what looking at different wavelengths is just looking at the colors.
Sure. Is
it reddish? Is it, black? Is it this or that? Our scientists on the team can actually start to identify this region is a little more interesting than that region. This region looks older, or looks like it's been disturbed more recently. So maybe some old stuff from the bottom has been, raised up to the surface. And so right now the scientists are just going, poring over all these images. We're about to enter this phase they call detailed survey, where essentially this is what they do. Take lots of images with different lighting conditions and all this, get all this information so that they can determine what's the most interesting place to go grab a sample. Now, part of that is also what's the safest place to go grab a sample. And there's this tension. So if you're a scientist on this mission, you say, you can, I don't care what the dangers are. Let's go there because that's the coolest bit. If you're like the navigators or the engineers, the spacecraft engineers, you're like, no thanks. No. There's a nice little sandy beach over there. Let's go there, even though you're not interested in it. So there's this natural tension. And then the PI, Dante Loretta, is sort of managing that, and then ultimately ultimately NASA gets to call the shots. Sure. But he really has the authority, and if he does a good job balancing the safety versus the science, NASA will say,
job well done.
Yeah, do it.
Fingers crossed for that. Yes. There's obviously, for research institutions and for schools like CU, there's got to be some student involvement in a mission like this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the CU radio science team there's basically 4 of us here. Okay. It's myself and another professor, Jay McMahon, and I'm like the radio science lead. He's the deputy lead, but we work very closely together on all of the activities that we need to do. And we have 2 graduate students, PhD students, who are helping us out on this work as well. It's Andrew French, and then another student is Dan Brack. Okay. And they're doing, at some level, some of the more grunt work of let's run the code and process the data. And then Jay and I are a little more oversight, or pulling together all the information, doing scientific analysis with that, presenting it at conferences. Hopefully, get the students to present stuff as well. Yeah. And all that. So that's the CU radio science team. We also have members of the radio science team that are at JPL. Okay. And so they're, not in the educational institution. This is their job. And they're actually working on a slightly different aspect of the mission, where they're actually measuring how strongly the sunlight is pushing the asteroid. And they're much more interested in this whole planetary defense thing, which is, where is the asteroid actually going to be in, 60, 80 years whenever it comes close to the Earth? Is it going to miss us or not?
Well, that seems like there's probably some other applications for that then too, with like solar sails, with anything pushing on a body like that. So that seems like a pretty cool part of the mission too. Yeah.
We have to develop and improve our methods of calculating all these tiny little forces acting on things. Yeah. And actually, even though they're tiny little forces, these tiny little forces, really just from sunlight shining on objects, turn out that they have this huge influence on how the whole solar system, and especially on how the small bodies in the solar system move around and sort of evolve over millions and billions of years. So actually, by characterizing and measuring these things very precisely for Bennu, we'll be able to take those scientific results and apply it to all these other bodies. Wow. So that's another benefit of doing it.
And I'm glad you were talking a little bit about the students too, because that's one of the things that you're laying the groundwork for future missions with the science that's returning, but it's also helping lay the groundwork for the people that are going to be involved 20, 30 years from now in your role.
Yeah, that's very true. And in fact, it's a point of pride with our department is we have I guess maybe like 20-ish or so of our alumni involved with the sort of the flight operations of OSIRIS-REx. Okay. Working at Lockheed, working at Goddard, working at JPL, working at all these other institutions. So yes, right now we're training students that they'll be able to do this in the future. We've already trained a lot of students that are doing this right now.
So for us,
this is it's a point of pride. We had a story that was written about this. I don't know, a few months ago or so, about how many alums of the department are actually integrally involved with the mission, and in fact, a lot of them are in leadership roles. So
I'll be sure to get a link to that then, and I'll make sure it's in the show notes for the podcast.
Yeah, I can give that to you.
Okay, cool. And one of the other things too is laying the foundation for future missions. What will we be able to take from this mission to Bennu and apply to other missions, whether it's in the outer solar system or to other asteroids? What are some of the practical lessons that can be learned?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can split that up into a couple different areas, actually. Okay. First, scientifically, once you go to a body like this, and we have a large team of people spending a lot of time cracking the nut of how do you actually navigate a spacecraft here? How do you come down to the surface? How do you do all this work? Once this mission is over, we'll have this understanding of all of these operational approaches, and we might be able to identify parts of it that could be really pushed off to more of a robotic spacecraft that can operate on its own. Okay. So we could potentially, based on what we learn from our experience here, start designing cheaper, smaller satellites that we could send out. They could do a lot of this grunt work themselves, and then email back our the interesting information that they find.
Sure.
The first time you do this is incredibly hard. You need this huge team, and maybe you will always need a huge team to make this work. But we'll also gain insight from doing this work that we might figure out how to do things more economically, so that we can have so we can spend for the same amount of dollars more satellites out to a wider range of asteroids to do more science. So just from a science perspective, that's one approach, and that's independent of everything that we learned that changes what we think we know, that then motivates new missions to check out other things. Okay. In another vein, we've already talked about it, is the whole planetary defense thing. Everything we learn about Bennu becomes extremely important if we need to push Bennu out of the way in the future. Okay. And we'll know.
Fingers crossed we don't have to.
Yeah, we don't have to. Although it's something that hopefully everyone can rally around.
That is
worldwide.
True. Yes, that would be nice.
But yeah, the composition, the strength of the body itself, how much void space is in the interior or not, because one of the most likely ways of deflecting an asteroid like of the size of Bennu is you take ideally a big garbage truck, loaded up with junk in space, and you go as fast as you can and you run into it. And you it's called a kinetic deflection.
Okay.
And yeah, you just try to push it out of the way, because you don't need to push it very much. If it's going to hit us maybe in, 100 years, a millimeter per second now is a lot. Yeah, exactly. So that's the second way. The third way, this is a little more far, in the future probably, but in some levels, this is the first or one. I wouldn't even say it's the first, but it's the next step in sort of the practical utilization of asteroids, or the mining of asteroids. And what we learn out of this mission about composition, what interesting material is there, how much water is or isn't trapped in the minerals, how do we operate around a small body like this? Is it practical for us to go there with a 3D printer and a scoop and put stuff in the hopper and print parts, or exude water or something like that? So also OSIRIS-REx is another step in that direction. Okay. of just how can we utilize all the stuff that is out there in space, quote unquote, free for the taking. So yeah, it's an environment we haven't spoiled yet, and it's pretty big, so it might take us a while.
And all the legal questions related to that too. It's literally a new frontier.
It is yes.
There's so many things people like to say, and this has been one of my big themes, I guess, for when I've been doing the podcast, is the golden age of space exploration was Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. Mm-hmm. And I think this mission is just another example of how we're living in the golden age right now. Yeah, especially for robotic craft. What's been happening in the last few decades have been just astounding. When I came into the field, one of the first things I did was interning at JPL, working on the Galileo mission. I was there a summer before it launched, and I was there the next summer after it had launched, and cool. It was very cool. And from that, even in my mind, you can go back to Voyager, but from that point forward, there's been so many missions that we've had that if I tried to list them all, I'd forget half of them probably. But they've all
really shaped our view of the solar system and of the cosmos. And once you know these things, you can't take it back.
Yeah.
And even if you forget what the name of the mission is, you don't forget the understanding or the insight that it gave you.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there's just so many things that humans can't do yet for space flight. So why would we wait around for us to be able to go out and do it? Let's just send some robots.
That is true. I've always thought, people would probably pay to teleoperate a robot on the moon. It's not quite the same as being there, but you can, leave your booth and go back home.
I wonder how far away we are from something like that. Probably not too far.
I think, yeah. If someone wanted to dump some money into it, I think they could make.
They have to cut you in, though, obviously.
Yeah, I gave it away a long time ago. So.
Oh goodness. Well, Dan, I've really appreciated talking with you, and I hope I can have you on again in the future.
I'd love to. I'll tell you, we're finding out some awesome stuff. And you may want to talk to me in the future once we publicize it all.
Sounds good.
So it's just, Bennu is very cool.
Okay.
I'll leave you with that.
A little teaser,
Yes.
Always leave everybody wanting more.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks. This is fun.
Links to everything we talked about today are in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. If you're new to the podcast, I would appreciate it if you could leave a review in iTunes. Reviews help more people find out about the show, and I'd be grateful if you could leave one. Until next time, I'm John Molnix, and I'll catch you on the flip side.